Good morning, Mr. Maleka. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Deputy Chief Justice.
Thank you. Are you ready?
I am ready. Chair, before we start, may I make sure that we will be talking from the same bundle of documents?
Yes.
The statement of the next witness, whose evidence you will hear shortly, is included in the bundle of Eskom witness statements, and it is marked U5.A.
I have a file marked U5A, and I've got the statement of the next witness in terms of the index as the last statement in that file.
Yes. We can assure you that to the extent the evidence contained in that statement implicates persons, the legal team has taken the liberty to send notices to those persons.
Yes.
And we're quite comfortable that those notices comply with Rule 3.3 of the rules.
Yes.
And perhaps in due course, there may well be responses to them. But for now, we have not received any indication of what potential responses might be.
Yes.
That is a bundle of documents that I'll be working through for the rest of Mr. Ephron's evidence. Unless this evidence takes us to some other bundles, out of caution, I asked your registrar to bring copies of the parliamentary reports that have now been placed before you in volume 3.
Yes.
Chair, I understand that yesterday you...
Well, before we move on, I said to you in terms of the index here, I've got the next witness statement as the last statement in the file marked U5. But I see that the index I was looking at doesn't tell me the page number, it tells me the section, but the file itself doesn't tell me where the different sections start. There is U5 at the beginning, so when I want to see what page the statement of the next witness starts, the index doesn't tell me that. I must just look for it. I should be able to find it.
Chair, mine is separated by a file divider.
Your one is better than mine. Mine has no file divider.
I understand from Ms. Hoffmeyer that that's the only statement you have. You ought not to look at any other document. The thickness of the bundle, including the statement, is as a result of the annexures to the statement.
So would the statement be at the top?
Right at the beginning, yes.
Oh, okay. Okay, I think there are two indices.
Yes. You can ignore the first and work from the second, the one which is indexed to statement.
Yeah, okay. No, I think I've got it.
And you'll see that item 1 is the statement of Mr. Clinton Ephron. It begins from page 1 to 28. What follows thereafter are annexes to their statement.
Yes, no, I've got it now. Thank you.
Yes. Chair, I believe that yesterday you heard evidence relating to the scientific operation of coal from mining, transportation, to the various places where coal will be required to produce electricity. And that by now
yes,
you have some idea about how coal works and why Eskom needs it in its various power stations. The next witness you're going to hear has had some practical workings around the business of coal.
Yes.
And to the extent that there are outstanding questions, he might well be able to assist us in regard to making business out of mining of coal.
Yes.
His name is Mr. Clinton Ephron. He is represented by our colleagues, and maybe before I ask Mr. Ephron to take the oath or affirmation, I should ask those who represent him to place their names on record.
Yeah, no, that's in order.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Justice. Appearing for the witness, Arnold Subel from the Johannesburg Bar, together with my learned friend, Carol Steinberg. Instructed by attorneys Worksmans to my right, and the representatives of Glencore also present at the hearing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I think time has now arrived for Mr. Ephron to take the oath of affirmation.
Yes, Registrar.
Please state your full names for the record.
Clinton Ephron.
Do you have any objections to taking the prescribed oath?
No.
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
Yes.
Do you swear that the evidence you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say so help me God.
So help me God.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Ephron, good morning.
Good morning.
You have had an occasion to consult with your legal representatives and some members of the legal team about your evidence, and thereafter you have formulated a statement which is now before you.
That's correct.
And I take it that you have read the contents of that statement and accompanying annexures in order to familiarize yourself once again with their contents, correct?
Correct.
Before we get to the substance of your evidence, there are matters of background that I'd like to raise with you. Some relate to your qualification and expertise, especially in the business of coal mining and coal purchase and sale. Others relate to how the Commission decided to procure your evidence. And let me start with the latter. You know that allegations of state capture involving the sale of a mine previously owned by Glencore is a matter that was previously investigated by the public protector. You know about that fact?
I'm aware.
Yes. And you know that the public protector...
I'm sorry, Mr. Ephron, please try and speak up a little bit so that the mic can capture what you say. Thank you.
And part of voice articulation and capturing is by looking in the direction of the chairperson.
Got it.
Yes. The public protector prepared a report flowing from her investigation, and in it, she references the extent of interface she has had with Glencore regarding optimum coal holdings and the mine it owned. What is your knowledge about the extent and the degree of engagement the public protector had with Glencore?
If I may, so Deputy Chief Justice, we met with the public protector before her report came out. I think it was a few months before, and we gave her evidence very similar to what's being presented today in terms of my statement, and it was only on one occasion that we met with, we didn't meet directly with the public protector herself, but we did meet with members of her team.
How did that engagement proceed? Did you hold any interview with her or any member of her staff?
We did.
Okay. You know that the Portfolio Committee on State-Owned Enterprises of our National Assembly also conducted investigation relating to those allegations. You know about that fact, I take it.
I'm aware.
Did Glencore make an input insofar as the work of that committee is concerned?
No, we were not asked to, and I think it was on the basis that the information from the public protector was clear and part of the evidence that was put forward, my understanding.
Did you ever testify before any other body of inquiry into these allegations?
No, I did not.
So this is the first time you present Glencore's version in a public forum?
That's correct.
Firstly, beginning with the statement that we will look at in due course.
Correct.
Can I get to some detail relating to your personal, maybe not personal, but professional qualifications and business experience? I note that in paragraph 1, if you can go to U5A, and in paragraph 1, you tell us about your qualifications, and you say in that regard that you are a chartered accountant. You confirm that?
Correct.
When did you qualify as a CA?
1993.
1993. And like all other CAs, I take it that you served articles in some firm.
With Grant Thornton.
Grant Thornton.
Correct.
You begin your work experience as described in that paragraph from 2013. But there is a gap of 10 years between your qualification date as a CA and your assumption of office as the Chief Executive Officer of Optimum Coal Mine Pty Limited. I wonder whether you will be willing to fill up that gap for us.
Sure. Firstly, just to correct you, Mr. Maleka, it's 20 years.
20 years. I'm sorry to understate the degree and extent of your experience.
No problem.
My apologies.
My entire professional career after I finished my articles was with Glencore in various roles, commodity trading, managing of assets, mainly involved in the business around South Africa and specifically around the commodity coal.
How did you rise through up the ranks of ultimately becoming the CEO of Optimum Coal Mine?
So it was a long period. Like I say, it was 20 odd years, and with the company we grew the asset base not only in South Africa but around the world, and I grew within the company, hopefully through hard work and dedication, and got to the point where in and around the early 2000s and even in the late 90s, we started procuring coal mines in South Africa, and I was actively involved in that process and in the background continuing to buy and sell the commodity of coal. Glencore, as you know, is a multi-commodity company, not only coal, but are specialized only in the coal department.
Yes. I wonder whether you can give us an appreciation of Glencore's coal business profile in South Africa.
Yes, so
it will become relevant later when we deal with what you refer in your statement as the so-called Section 54 notices. But for now, please give us a picture of the coal business of Glencore in this country.
So I think it's important to give you some background around the pre-extrata days and the post-extrata days. Glencore was, in its own right, a large multinational and still is, procuring commodities from various suppliers, and also became an industrial player in terms of buying the mines that secured the source of supply, which entailed getting involved in the actual production of the commodity. In South Africa, we we started procuring mines and becoming shareholders in mines in the 90s, in the early 90s, and that progressed until the formation of Xstrata in 2002. And then in 2002, I hope my years are correct, Deputy Chief Justice, but it's some time ago.
Well, I would expect them to be correct with a chartered accountant.
True, true, but with age, things do change.
Yes.
So in 2002, Xstrata purchased the mining assets that Glencore had in South Africa, and Glencore still retained a significant portion of the equity of Xstrata. And from 2002 to around 2013, Xstrata built a relatively large mining house in South Africa. And then in 2013, Glencore and Xstrata merged. And I skipped a little bit, is that there was a period from around 2005 where Glencore started procuring assets in its own right. Xstrata was in existence. So Glencore started procuring certain mines together with various partners. And in 2013, it was the worldwide merger between Glencore and Xstrata. And all the assets in South Africa were put together under one banner called Glencore Coal South Africa, which was in 2013. And it was at that point that I was made CEO of that group, which represented at that point Glencore's coal assets and Xstrata's coal assets. I must remind you, Judge, that this was a worldwide merger. It wasn't specific to South Africa, and South Africa was part of the merger.
Thank you.
And if I may interrupt, I'm sorry, that continues into existence today. So the merger in 2013 and all those mining assets are now held under the Glencore Coal South Africa banner.
Right. Can I close off that topic by asking you to tell us where else in the world does Glencore have coal mine presence?
Glencore has coal mine presence in the production, in specifically Colombia and Australia.
Can I move then to paragraph 4 of your statement? And it talks about the history of the Optimum coal mine and the process through which its ownership moved from one to other owners. The first thing that I'd like to ask you there is to confirm that Optimum coal mine was operated primarily to support Eskom with coal for its requirement at a specific power station. What was that power station?
So that power station was Hendrina. And if I may, to please the Commission, I would like to set the context of what I'm about to say, not only with regard to the history of Optimum, but also my recollection in terms of the statement. This statement has been prepared without the luxury and benefit of hindsight. It was what I felt, and my understanding of the events of the time they occurred. And I think that's important as we sit here today, many years later. I think it's important that we know that from the outset. Also, in terms of the history of Optimum, again, it's from my understanding and information that I've gained from my experience, but I cannot vouch for the absolute accuracy of the paragraph starting from paragraph 5 onwards before Glencore became involved.
Yeah, we'll get there because there are some questions that I'd like you to clarify.
Sure.
To the extent that from recollection and documentation at your disposal may provide you with some understanding. But what I want to start with is the contractual basis between Eskom and Optimum coal mine for the supply of coal. You say that it was on a cost plus margin basis.
Yes. So initially when the mine was formed, this mine was formed specifically to supply coal to the Hendrina power station back in the 70s. That was the purpose of this mine. And there was a contract that was entered into at the time, which was very common in terms of the way in which Eskom procured, and that was on a cost-plus basis. So what does that mean, a cost-plus basis?
Yes.
That means that Eskom was wholly responsible for all the costs associated with mining the coal, and in return, the mining house would receive a fixed margin. So there was very little risk that the mining house had. The mining house obviously had to account for its costs, but Eskom was directly responsible, and there's still many of those contracts in place today. That's how the Optimum Hendrina relationship started back in the even 70s and also into the 80s. It was only later, in the late 80s and early 90s, when the export market and Richards Bay Coal Terminal had just been built, that the owners of Optimum Coal Mine decided to start the export market and to start exporting coal from Optimum Coal Mine, because there was significant reserves at Optimum Coal Mine.
We'll get to the export leg of that business, but for now we would like to understand the significance of this pricing regime called cost-plus model.
Right.
You have just elaborated on the advantages of that model insofar as the mine owner and operator are concerned. Does it have any benefit for an owner of a power station such as Eskom, specifically Hendrina in this case?
Yes.
Can you just elaborate for us? What would be the advantage of Eskom assuming the primary and prior obligation of carrying the cost of establishing a mine of that sort?
Judge, I think that the cost-plus operations, or the cost-plus contracts, were the best contracts for Eskom. Because Eskom, if they controlled the costs correctly, and there was mechanisms in the contract to do so, they would always be paying a fair price for coal. They weren't subject to the market. And considering the size of Eskom and the reliance that it places on coal, that for me was by far the best contractual basis. That being said, many contracts were entered into after this period on a fixed price basis, which specifically at the time that Optimum started to export, Eskom and the owners of Optimum at that time entered into a different type of contract. And that contract is a fixed price contract. That means your price is fixed without change. What happens on an annual basis is there's an inflationary adjustment, and that inflationary adjustment is supposed to represent the genuine costs that the mine would incur as a result of inflation, of various baskets of indices that would be used to incorporate that inflationary adjustment. In 1993, if I may, that is when Optimum entered into a long-term agreement on a fixed cost basis, fixed price basis, with Hendrina Power Station, Eskom, at the time. And that was for a period of 25 years. So at that point in time, they entered into a 25-year agreement on the basis of the reserves that were held at Optimum Coal Mine.
So what is the difference between the cost-plus arrangement and the fixed price arrangement, if you can deal with that?
Yes, so specifically and in the simplest of terms, cost-plus, Eskom are responsible for all the costs, regardless of what they are, plus an agreed-upon margin for the mining house. A fixed price, the mine is wholly responsible for all the costs and will sell to Eskom at a price regardless of its cost and margin. So it's set at a specific price, at 100 Rand a ton. Optimum would sell coal at 100 Rand a ton to Hendrina for a period of 25 years, escalated at an inflationary adjustment. So it's a fixed price contract. If the costs blow out, that is the responsibility of the mine.
So the fixed price arrangement is what would be a normal business a transaction as opposed to the cost plus arrangement, which doesn't seem to be a normal arrangement, or not really?
No, so if we talk about a cost plus, it was a normal arrangement for Eskom at the time, and it made sense and still does, I believe, at the time, because of the reliance that Eskom places on the mine, and the coal is right next door. So a cost plus keeps everyone honest in terms of the genuine costs and ensures the sustainability, and this is critical. It ensures the sustainability of the mine.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm sure there were reasons for it, and they may have been good reasons. What I'm asking you is whether in normal business transaction, it doesn't appear to me to be normal that the client would be responsible for your costs. You know, you would take into account what your costs are in fixing your fee or what you will charge for your services or for your products, isn't it?
Correct.
So that's why I'm saying it doesn't seem to me that that's a normal business arrangement, but it may have been normal to Eskom or to the coal industry at a particular time. Is that right? Is that more or less what you would agree with as well?
That's exactly right. You're correct in your summation. It's not a normal transaction.
Yes.
It's not a normal transaction. But if managed correctly, I believe that it makes sense, because you are building the power station because the resource,
for the specific client.
Because the coal is there.
Yes.
You're building the power station right on the resource.
Yes.
So that's why it made sense at the time.
Yes. So the fixed price arrangement, if I understood you correctly, which I think you said started in 1993, is that right? So you were then moving, or Glencore was moving away from the previous arrangement now.
So it wasn't Glencore, to correct you. At the time, it was the owners of
the
Optimum.
predecessors.
At the time, they decided to Transnatal entered into this agreement on a cost plus basis. This was long before Glencore got involved. Glencore only got involved in this mine 20 years later.
Yes.
This same contract was continuing.
Yes, under different
management.
Yes. So, but basically, whoever it was, they were now together with Eskom moving away from the previous arrangement.
Correct.
And if I understood you correctly, this appears to have been influenced by the availability of the option of exporting coal?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Because it became cumbersome to calculate the costs when you are exporting and you're supplying to Eskom. So Eskom and the mine at that point decided it would just be easier to do it on a fixed price basis.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Mr. Malega.
Thank you, Chair. There is one issue that I'd like to explore with you relating to the different pricing regimes you have indicated. We have read a lot about a business strategy called security of supply. And I take it that you know what that means in your business.
Yes.
What role did that business strategy play in relation to the cost plus pricing regime that Eskom resorted to in the early phase of this mine?
If I understand the question correctly, it's normally these cost plus arrangements were on the basis of the life of mine. So the security of supply for Eskom was ensured and secured. So it was done on the basis where all the resources that belonged to the mine were ceded or pledged or bonded basically to Eskom. Eskom didn't necessarily own them, but they were part of the transaction, that all the resources that belonged to the mining house at that point were dedicated for the power station.
And
I hope I've answered your question correctly.
I think you did, and I'd like to press ahead on it to make sure that I understand the implication of security of supply. But from your answer, you do indicate that it was an assurance extended to Eskom that for as long as the mine has coal in it, Eskom will be the primary recipient of that coal, correct?
Correct.
How, in terms of the contractual relationship, was that security of supply achieved?
It was only contractual. So it was contractual where in the specific CSA or the coal supply agreement, they make reference to all the tonnages. There is a very long agreement which is marked, if I can take you to CE1,
It is
Deputy
on
Chief
page 29,
Justice,
Chair.
which starts on page 29.
Thank you.
I know you'll take me out there, but I'd like you, if you don't mind, to lead the discussion, bearing in mind that you are free to direct attention to parts of the CSA that you conceive to be important. But for now, can I ask you to go to page 33?
30?
3.
Okay.
You will see that there is a reference to the definition of the maximum tonnage. You will see that it is referenced as 6.5 million tons, which may be required to be supplied in each year in terms of this CSA plus a further 3 million tons of coal per annum, which may be required to be supplied. So there is a minimum amount plus an additional amount. I know that you were not party to this agreement at the time when it was formulated, but do you confirm that this was the type of tonnage which was expected in terms of this agreement?
That's correct. It was, they refer to it contractually as the maximum tonnages, but 6.5 million tons was the contractual amount that needed to be supplied for a period of 25 years.
And then if you go to...
So just 1 second. Is the point you are making there with your last statement that in practice it might not have been the maximum, but it was what was required by the contract, which I would understand to mean you may have at some stage provided more than what they call the maximum here?
Yes, that was by agreement, but for the main part, and I was not party to this agreement, Deputy Chief Justice, but it's 6.5 million tons per annum, and there was mechanisms where it was slightly lower or potentially slightly higher,
Yes.
and that was written into the contract.
Okay, no, that's all right.
And Chair, to answer your question, may I direct Mr. Ephron to go to page 34 and look at the definition of minimum tonnage. Are you there?
Yes.
What is the minimum tonnage originally required in terms of this contract?
The minimum tonnage in this contract was 3 million tons per annum.
Yes. So there is a minimum which is 3 million, there is a maximum which is 6.5 million, and there is a discretionary amount of a further 3 million tonnage per month.
That's correct.
Yes.
Just to add, there is something in this contract which I haven't studied intricately. It's a 100-page contract.
Yes.
Where it talks of that additional 3 million. In other words, the amount above the 3 million tons minimum that it would be supplied. And my understanding, and I would need a little bit of time to go back and and go into this, but my understanding, and I think for the purposes of the commission, I think it's important that it was 6.5 million tons became the annual contractual tonnage that was required to be supplied from Optimum to Hendrina Power Station.
Yes.
So, would I be correct to say, since the agreement provided both for a annual maximum and an annual minimum, that the annual minimum provided there would be the annual minimum in terms of the agreement, and the annual maximum would be the annual maximum in terms of the agreement. But based on what you said a few minutes ago, the parties sometimes arrange for a little more than the maximum stipulated in the agreement. Is that right?
You are correct.
Yes.
I would
Okay.
say for the most period, not
For
for
the most-
various,
oh,
for the
okay.
majority of the time.
You provided more than the maximum
No,
stipulated.
for the majority of the time, we provided, the mine provided more than the minimum and closer to the maximum
Oh, okay, okay.
for the
But you-
majority of the time.
Yeah, but you did sometimes provide more than the contractual maximum.
That I would have to check.
Oh, okay. No, I'm sorry.
That
It's
I would
just
have to check.
I thought that's what you said earlier on, so I must have misunderstood.
No, so
Okay.
according to just under the definitions, which is page 33 and 34,
Yes.
it talks about a maximum of 6.5 million
Yes.
and a minimum of 3 million.
Yes, yes.
But there are clauses in the contract that
Yes.
talk to providing for the 6 million.
Yes.
I'd have to go and look at it perhaps when we
No,
break.
we
but-
No, that's
understand.
fine.
But,
It might
for
not-
now,
mo-
we're
for, the
looking
mo-
at-
for the most part, the mine supplied, and this is back 20 years, the mine supplied 6.5 million tons per annum.
Yes.
Okay, no, that's all.
Mr.
that's all.
Ephron, you can accept that my questions are purely directed at the design of the contractual arrangements,
Correct.
not its implementation.
Correct.
I'm merely talking about the contractual expectation of the tonnages in line with the definition.
You are correct.
Can I ask you to go to page 35? And I draw your attention to the last definition on this page, purely for the sake of completeness. You will see that the definition refers to the previous agreement, and it is defined, but the important part of the definition is the date of 24 June 1983. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Is it fair to conclude from this definition that the CSA we are looking at was not the first CSA or contractual relationship between Eskom and Transnatal, that there was a previous one which began in 1983?
That's correct.
Looking backwards and from your knowledge, was Optimum coal mine in existence, and was it supplying Eskom with coal since the 1983 days?
Yes.
So it has had some long life.
It's had a long life.
Okay.
In fact, if I can direct you to paragraph 6 of my statement.
So it is at page 1. Yes.
To the best of my knowledge, Optimum Collieries had been supplying coal to Eskom since the 1970s.
Yes. Thank you for that clarity. And again, we're looking at the contract and its design. Can I ask you to go to page 38 and look at paragraph 2.3 of the introduction to the substance of the CSA we're looking at? You will see that it records that the owner of Optimum Coal Mine at the time, Optimum Collieries Pty Limited, its operation was subsequently transferred to a holding company called TNC, and that we know is Transnatal.
Sorry, I've lost you. Were you looking at page 38, 2.3?
3.2.
2.3.2.
3.2 on page 38.
A natural person includes an artificial person and vice versa.
No.
Why have I got...
look at paragraph 3.2 of the agreement. On
Ah,
what
3.2.
page? Yes. On
Okay.
what page of your document
Got
does
it.
it
The
appear?
operations of Optimum Collieries Proprietary Limited were subsequently transferred to its holding company, Transnatal Collieries. Got it.
You got it.
Yes.
Yes. So it seems to me when I look at this that there was some arrangement where Transnatal took over the operation of the mine, previously controlled by Optimum Collieries. Do you see that?
Yes.
And that was the purpose of the agreement.
Yes.
The key part, though, for the purposes of the earlier questions I asked you about security of supply, begin at page 39, paragraph 3.4, and I hope that your paragraph 3.4 is
No.
at page 39.
I've got it.
Can you read it for us?
Of course. As Eskom is Optimum's primary customer, it is the intention of the parties that the coal requirements of Eskom will enjoy preference over other customers of Optimum, and accordingly Eskom will be entitled to first call on any coal produced by Optimum, including, if necessary, export quality coal, upon the terms and conditions contained in this agreement.
Yes. If I look at that part, you're not a lawyer, I accept that, but you're a businessman. If I look at that part of the agreement, which gives Eskom the right of preference, it means in the contractual design of this agreement that Eskom has a right to call you to deliver the 6.5 million ton per month, and you will be obliged to do so.
Correct.
It also means that to the extent necessary, assuming Eskom requires the additional 3 million tons per month, you will also be required to do so. Even if it means that you're going to get that additional 3 million from coal intended for export market consumption.
That appears to be correct from our reading.
Yes. Then there is a duration clause. We're going to talk about it. But for the present purposes, can I ask you to confirm the duration of this agreement as is set out in paragraph 4.1?
Yes. So the duration, Deputy Chief Justice, was from 1993 until 2008, which is 15 years.
Yes. I think
And then there was a mechanism to extend it. That was at the option of Eskom to extend it for a further 10 years. And I think that's in 4.2 on page 40
and 4.3,
and 4.3.
which gives us the express date of the extension.
So essentially, at the time in 2008, Eskom did extend it. So the entire duration, I point out again, if I may jump around to my statement, page 2, number 7, it was for 25-year period,
Yes.
from 1993 until 2018.
25 years is a long time. It's a
It's
generation.
a very long time.
It's a generation. It seems to me that there is a reason why Eskom would go into such a long-term contract, originally on a cost-plus basis that you have explained. What I'd like to explore with you for now is the other side of the pricing regime with this long-term contract.
So this contract was no longer a cost-plus contract. This contract was a fixed-price contract for a period of 25 years. And if I may direct the Commission to clause 27.1 of the agreement, and I'm going to give you the page in a second. Page 71.
Yes.
I'm highlighting this hardship clause because what's important to understand is when you're entering into a 25-year agreement with a fixed price, there is absolutely no way that you can know, in the uncertain environment of mining, what is going to happen in terms of the mine, its geographical location, its quality of coal. So at the time, the people that signed this agreement had the foresight to include a hardship clause. It forms quite a big basis of the statement, and I think it's worth pointing out. And if I may read 27.1, it's very short.
Yes.
In entering into this agreement, the parties declare it to be their intention that this agreement shall operate between them with fairness and without undue hardship. The importance of that, Deputy Chief Justice, is that there was a point in time, and we're going to read it further on in the statement, that Optimum was enduring severe financial hardship. And it was at that point in time that Optimum went to Eskom in the hope that we could try and alleviate the losses in some form in terms of 27.1. Because in a 25-year agreement, there's no way that one would be able to account for all the possibilities of what could go wrong. And what came to the realization in 2013, and also in 2011 for that matter, is that the inflationary adjustment that was being used in the contract was no longer representative of the genuine costs that the mine was incurring on an annual basis. So there was what we called a margin creep. A margin creep meant that every year the price was being adjusted by the inflationary adjustment as per the contract, but because the real costs were higher than the inflationary adjustment, the margin was being eroded, the margin that was envisaged. And eventually there was a point where the costs exceeded the selling price to Eskom. And the idea at the time and the intention of my understanding was under 27.1 was that this hardship clause was created to avoid this and other issues. But it was certainly created to try and alleviate the problems that would be incurred when the mine does, or if the mine does, incur hardship.
Mr. Ephron, we will get to that issue, but now that you have started with the contractual structure relating to the hardship clause, do you mind if we complete the implementation of those hardship provisions? Because the agreement contemplates how the hardship clause can be invoked. If you look at paragraph 27.3 on page 72, there is a contractual process to invoke those circumstances of hardship. Correct?
That's correct. So it goes from 27.2, and that's on page 72, and there's a long legal all the way up to page 74, 27.6 of the mechanism that the parties would have to follow in order to go down the route of proving hardship or not.
Sure. The substance of it is that if and when a dispute arises about whether there exists in truth and fact a hardship within the meaning of the agreement, that dispute will be resolved via arbitration, correct?
Correct.
We'll get to what happened in the circumstances of the present issue and case. So let's not rush to them yet, because
no problem.
They may not properly sequence your evidence.
No problem.
But you have dealt with the provision and the implementation of that provision.
No problem.
And of course, that arises because there is a question of penalties, and I'd like to take you to certain specific provisions of the agreement. First of all, can I ask you to go to page 42? And I draw your attention to this to underscore that principle of security of supply. You will see that paragraph 6.1 deals with the obligation to exclusively supply coal for Eskom at a specific power station. Do you mind to deal with it to the best of your knowledge? Are you at page 42, paragraph 6.1?
Sure, I'm just reading it, if I may.
You can read it out loudly if you want to.
So, allow me. So 6.1, Eskom shall, with effect from the commencement date and thereafter for a duration of this agreement, purchase, subject to 6.3, its entire requirements of coal for Hendrina exclusively from TNC and no other sources, provided that Eskom shall purchase not less than the minimum tonnages in each year in accordance with the provisions of 14, read with Schedule 7 here too.
Right. And you confirm that it's obligation to exclusively procure, and it is the obligation to exclusively supply the minimum tonnage.
That's correct.
Correct? Now, there is a clause which is going to become relevant later, especially when you deal with the difficulties that Optimum Coal Mine began to experience, and it's about coal quality and penalties.
Mm-hmm.
As I pick it up, it is on page 46, paragraph 9. And if you don't mind, for my purposes, you can read paragraph 2.9.
9.2.
9.2, I'm sorry.
TNC shall be obliged to pay to Eskom the penalties relating to any coal delivered to Eskom which does not comply with the specifications in respect of calorific value, moisture content, volatiles, or abrasiveness on the basis set out in Schedule 1 here too.
And the rest of the clause deals with what constitutes coal that does not comply with specifications, including how you could remedy the affected coal, correct?
Correct.
And then if you go to 9.4 on page 48, you will see that there is a reference to the fact that penalties will be the only remedy that Eskom has in terms of this agreement, arising from non-compliant coal. Do you see that?
Correct. In other words, no consequential losses.
Yes. It seems to me when I read this contract, and please confirm whether my understanding of it is in line with your business expectation, having operated under the CSA, that it contemplated a continued contractual arrangement for the supply of coal. And the fact that coal that is supplied may not be consistent with the agreed specification would not result in the termination of the agreement. Instead, Eskom will enjoy a specific contractual remedy, and that is the imposition of penalty. So the design of this agreement is to keep alive the contractual relationship in terms of this agreement for its duration, which you said was 25 years.
That's correct.
And again, that is another indicator of the security of supply. Do you agree?
That's correct.
Yes. And lastly, in paragraph 9.5, during the days of Transnatal, it was entitled to payment of bonuses of two forms. You'll find them in 9.5.1, general bonuses, 9.5.2, consistency bonuses. What I'd like to understand from you is when Glencore ultimately took over this mine and the pricing regime became different, which is fixed price method of pricing, were you entitled to these forms of bonuses?
No, because the coal that was being supplied did not justify the bonuses that are reflected in 9.5.1.
Yes. There is a sampling and analysis provision, and I'm not going to ask you to go through it. It's up to you if you want to do it. You have dealt with the hardship clause. I'm not going to ask you to repeat it. And I would like to draw your attention to a Cession clause, which you will find on page 75, paragraph 29.2. And it's a clause that becomes important in the light of the historic evolution of the ownership of the mine up to and when Glencore acquired ownership. Do you see that?
Correct, I see it.
Yes. My understanding of that clause, if I may be quick on it, is that the owner and or operator of that mine is entitled to cede its rights and obligations to a third party. Do you see that?
Yes.
Would Eskom be entitled to, or does the agreement require Eskom to consent to that cession?
It does.
Okay. Can you show me where it does?
In 29.1,
29.1.
if I may read it.
Yes.
Save as contemplated in 29.2, no party may cede or assign the whole or any part of its rights or obligation under this agreement to any other party without the prior consent in writing of the other parties.
Yes. That issue of cession and Eskom's entitlement to consent to it would become important when we deal with the question of ownership of coal mine after Glencore had acquired ownership of it. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
We'll get back to it and see how Eskom sought to exercise the rights it had later on. So that in the final analysis, clause 29.2 that I had previously referred you to is an exception to the rule that Eskom is entitled to consent to a cession.
Correct.
Mr. Ephron, I have taken you to these elaborate provisions of the CSA in order to get some kind of an understanding from you about how it previously operated. And I'd like to get quickly through the evolution of the ownership of this mine, which you explained in paragraph 8.
Yes.
What is interesting in that paragraph is that you introduce a new owner called BHP.
Yes.
Are you able to indicate to us the relationship, if any, between Transnatal, which was the owner or operator of this mine, under the CSA we have looked at, and BHP, which you now record as the new owner who took over the mine around or before May 2008?
Only by recollection,
Yes.
Mr. Maleka,
Yes.
and if the Commission allows, it's there was a merger between Transnatal and Rand Coal at the time, and it became BHP, and so Transnatal essentially, it did change ownership, but it was through a large merger that occurred at the time, if my recollection is correct.
Yes. What is interesting about this paragraph is that it refers to two forms of proprietary acquisition by BHP. First is the mine itself, but second is an interest in a separate entity called the Richards Bay Coal Terminal. Do you see that?
That's correct.
And you say BHP at the time acquired 9.5% interest in that coal terminal operating entity. That issue is going to become important later on in your evidence. What I want you to explain to us as a matter of context is what is this Richards Bay Coal Terminal?
Richards Bay Coal Terminal is the terminal that was established in the 70s for major exporters of South Africa in order to exploit and explore the export market. And there was a rail line that was built between Witbank in those days and Richards Bay in order to export coal. This 9.5% was a direct shareholding in the Richards Bay Coal Terminal, and which was owned at that stage in the structure of OCM, my understanding. Again, this is, if the Deputy Chief Justice will allow, this is before Glencore took control of the mine.
And I understand, but Glencore ultimately took over, including the coal terminal
the
interest.
same assets.
Yes,
So
yes.
it was the same assets. So
Yes.
in the group of assets, there were essentially, if I may, it's jumping a little bit ahead, but there was OCH, which was the holding company, Optimum Coal Holdings, and there were, for the main part, 3 subsidiaries under that. One was Optimum Coal Mines, one was the shareholding in Richards Bay under Optimum Coal Terminal, and one was Koenfontein Mines.
Yes.
And those were the 3 main subsidiaries. There were other ones, but those were the 3. I hope that gives you a picture of the structure of the mine,
It gives us,
let's say of the organization.
Chair, those 3 subsidiaries are going to become important
Yes.
because although they appear on the face of it to be separate entities, they were all held together by a holding company, Optimum Holding Company Limited, as I understand. Correct?
That's correct.
Yes. And they become vital in the course of the debate which took place later on between Glencore and the various suitors who wanted to buy Optimum Coal,
Yes.
together with or without those 2 other subsidiaries.
Okay.
And it's going to become important to see how the debate is introduced on those negotiations. But I'd ask you to bear in mind those 3 separate subsidiaries.
Okay.
Mr. Ephron, I wonder whether you would forgive me if I'd like to get some more details on the Optimum Coal Terminal, because it seems to be an asset of value for the various mining companies who were involved in coal exploitation.
It is an asset of value. It's the right to utilize a private terminal, a very efficient private terminal in Richards Bay, one of the biggest in the world today. Richards Bay Coal Terminal was and still is one of the biggest, and this 9.5% right gave the Optimum Coal Mine the right to export coal through the terminal.
Yes. I mean, as I understand, most of the mining operations are inland.
Yes.
And if you're going to become involved in the export business, you will have to transport your commodity via rail or road.
Correct. Mainly rail.
Mainly rail.
Mainly rail, but there are other alternatives. There's Durban Coal Terminal, there's Matola in Maputo Coal Terminal, there's another terminal in Richards Bay that also deals with coal, but primarily Richards Bay Coal Terminal represents 90% of the exports today out of South Africa.
Yes. And Chair, it's a very, very interesting way to see how cargoes of coal are offloaded from these rail wagons into these
Yes.
vessels and tankers for export market. And
It's extremely efficient and modern.
yes.
Yes. Thank you.
But as far as you're concerned, when you took over as the CEO, I mean, unless it's a matter that is confidential, are you able to tell us what was the rent value of that 9.5% of Glencore's interest in the coal terminal?
I'm sorry to disappoint you, but it's not possible to put a value on that. It depends on the coal price.
No, but how do you account for it?
You don't account for it in terms of value. When you buy it, it's what it's worth to you. So It honestly depends. It's very difficult to value Richards Bay shareholding. It's possible, but the key thing is that it's inextricably linked to the mine. So if you have Richards Bay coal allocation and you don't have a mine, it's worth a lot less. So if you do have a mine that has export coal and you can export from that mine, then it's worth a significant amount of money. But again, just to be realistic, if the coal price is very low, Richards Bay coal terminal value is very low too. If the coal price is very high, Richards Bay coal terminal value is high as well. I can't give you an exact number.
I suppose to anticipate what I was going to ask you. When I come to the negotiations between you and Oak Bay,
yes,
involving Eskom, around the sale of these 3 separate assets.
I do. And if you'd allow, I can answer that right now, if you'd allow.
Yes.
So at the point in time when it came to selling the assets of Optimum Coal Holding, which was Optimum Coal Mine, Optimum Coal Terminal, and Koenfontein, we placed a value, as in Glencore, placed a value on the Richards Bay allocation at that point in time, which was a reasonable value, not very high, because coal prices were very depressed. And we were also of the view at that point in time that there would be significant amount of trains and that Richards Bay would not be constrained by shareholding only, because Richards Bay has opened up significantly in the last few years, not only to Richards Bay shareholders, but to many other participants through various methods in order to ensure that it's more encompassing and that Richards Bay Coal Terminal is open to all exporters, not only to the shareholders.
Chair, I see it's 9:15. I wanted to conclude one topic on background before we adjourn.
Okay.
Subject to your guidance.
Okay, you may conclude it.
Thank you. We will get to the value that you put up for the purposes of the discussion. And I invite you to disclose it unless it is confidential. But when we get to that point, please bear in mind that there is a request I extended to you. We now know that at some point, around June 2011, Glencore enters the picture, correct?
Correct.
And it acquires these assets.
That's correct.
And Glencore was not the only shareholder who acquired these assets. You mentioned by name other shareholders, and unless it is confidential, you can tell us who those shareholders are.
Sure. So there was Glencore, represented by Peruto, which was 67%. There was Lexshell Holding, which was 9.64%. There was approximately 2.92% of various minority groups. And then there was the mines, the community trust. The community trust was a trust created for communities around the mine. And in addition, there was an employees trust. And the community trust and the employee trust together held almost 20%, 19.86% of the equity of the mine.
And then you tell us that Lexshell disposed of its shareholding sometime on the 22nd of May 2014, which is a special day for some people present here, but for your purposes.
Yes, that's correct.
Can you tell us why there was that disposal?
Yes, so President Ramaphosa was the shareholder, and when his re-entry into politics, he exited the company. I think it was some months before the intention to exit, but I think the actual date of exit was the 22nd of May 2014.
And what happened to his shares?
He
Who acquired them?
He sold his shares to a company called Pembani.
Pembani.
Correct.
So Pembani became the minority shareholder in Optimum Coal Holdings.
That's correct.
Chair, I think this is an appropriate time to adjourn.
Yes, no, that's fine. We will take the short adjournment and we'll resume at 25:02.
Thank you, Chairman.
We adjourn.
Let me make a note.
Tuesday afternoon we've got to take up. Tuesday afternoon we've got to take up. Right, you've got 5 minutes. Just like this one. Like this one.
And you're on which session?
4. I just saved them 3.
You want to go home?
I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to do anything. As long as you'll have evidence. Just like right back right here. Mouse. Moose. 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 So you can make fucking do it. How's your little boy?
It's okay.
Is he back home?
Yeah.
Burns, not permanent marks or?
No, he just that it was not even 10 hair skin, so that was like maybe
Oh no, I saw that.
Yeah.
But it's not deep second degree or third degree.
Yes.
Oh no, then he's going to be very lucky.
Yeah, so just
Very.
will be good. What?
10 to 6. 10 to 6. And we're still not finished. No, I just moved it over. So I put the microphone over. I need to spare mic for another meeting. Supposed to have 30 mics. I've only got 29. So I need the 30. Cheers, gentlemen. Cheers.
Yes, you may proceed, Mr. Maleka.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, we have now progressed up to paragraph 15.
Yes, 1-5.
1.5 of Mr. Ephron's statement. And I'm not going to take you through the details of paragraphs 15 and 16, but you are at liberty to summarize the contents of those paragraphs for us and elaborate on them, of course, if you believe that they are crucial to your evidence.
Thank you. So if we go to page 3, which is clause 15, and it starts talking about this is 1 year after Glencore's in control of the mine in April 2013. What we'd like to highlight, Deputy Chief Justice, again, apart from the hardship clause, there was also a clause that envisaged, because you are talking about a vast resource of reserves in the ground, there's no way of knowing, besides continuous sampling and analysis, of knowing exactly what the qualities of that coal was going to come out as. What happened to Optimum is it's geographically expanded over a period of 20 years. Of course, the resources that were very close to the beneficiation and the washing plant were mined first, and then it continued to expand geographically. Today, it's approximately 30 square kilometers. It's a vast area. And there's a massive conveyor belt system that links the mining to the beneficiation plant, and then straight from the beneficiation plant to the washing plant to Hendrina Power Station, or exports, and it's also right in the same vicinity in the complex. What was envisaged at the time of entering into the contract was that some of the qualities of the coal may vary because of the information that was had at the time of entering into the contract. One of those was the sizing, and we specifically refer in clause 15 to the sizing of the coal. Basically, what we were saying at this point in time was that because the mine had expanded so significantly and there were so many changeover points on the conveyor belt, this massive conveyor belt system, the coal was naturally degrading, naturally breaking down, and there was more smaller pieces. It doesn't refrain from the quality, the intrinsic quality of the coal, but the sizing of it was a concern for Eskom. And it was also a concern for the mine. So what the mine did, and this was when we were involved in the mine, is and I'd like to take you to page 129, CE2.
Yes.
Yes.
This is a letter to Eskom dated 23 April 2013 from the then Chief Operating Officer of the colliery at that time, Rian Duploy. And I'd like to direct you to clause 3 or point 3, if I may read.
Yes.
It says, Optimum OCH has now reached the conclusion that the sizing specifications set out in clause 3.4.3 of the first addendum are no longer realistically representative of the coal which OCM can reasonably be expected to achieve from the exploitation of the coal deposits constituting the Optimum colliery. It being OCM's view that OCM is conducting its operations in a proper manner and in accordance with best industry standards. This clause allowed us to open negotiations with Eskom in order to address the sizing issue. Yes. And I think it's important to mention at this stage that Eskom at that point explicitly refrained from imposing penalties on sizing on the mine because they accepted our explanation subject to various tests that would have been done or will over the period. And that this letter started off a process at that point where we would investigate what was occurring on the mine. So we were being paid for the coal. Eskom was using the coal. The sizing only affects the handleability of the coal. It doesn't affect the intrinsic value of the coal. And as long as the sizing as long as the coal could be transported over the conveyor belt, everyone was happy. And that was the case at this point in time.
Mr. Ephron, can I ask you this? We have looked at the CSA and have looked at the different clauses. What Glencore is doing in April 2013 is to invoke negotiations under clause 3.4.3 of the first addendum.
That's correct.
I have looked at the bundle of the documentation. I could not locate the first,
In fact,
the second, and third addenda.
my legal representatives, we were remiss in including it in the bundle of documents. If I may, can that be inserted
Yes.
subsequent?
Can you please in time ask, well, they hear the discussion, and hopefully in time they will make available
Yes, of course.
those addenda as they amend
Will do.
the CSA.
Will do.
But for the present purposes, we assume that the CSA we are looking at was in its original form as casted before the amendments.
This specific clause was 3.4.3 of the first addendum of the CSA.
Yes.
So that can be subsequently included in the bundle of
Yes.
documents. And when we look at addendums, we look at them as part of the contract.
I understand that.
So that's why that's why perhaps we were erroneous in including it. But for the purposes of this, we're happy to include them.
Thank you very much.
Well, maybe if at all possible, that could be fixed during lunch and during the lunch break, if at all possible. I'm sure with all the technology that's available, enough copies should be available by that time.
Yes.
Okay, thank
So
you.
I see that my colleagues representing Glencore nod
Yes, yes, no,
in
Yes.
confirmation that will be done.
yes. No, thank you.
You have drawn our attention to page 129 of U5.A. You have read it. What I want to ask you is this. Was this the first formal way of raising the sizing issue of the optimum coal stock? Or were there other prior discussions before this letter? As far as we can remember.
As far as I can recall, this was the first interaction with Eskom formally.
Yes.
There was various discussions around the sizing before this formal letter on page 129 marked CE2.
Yes.
The sizing problem, had you had it before, or was it starting only around April 2013 or thereabout, between yourselves and Eskom?
From my recollection, I would have to check, but I think it started before. It started maybe a year before.
About a year or so. But prior to that, as far as you know,
As far as I recall,
it had never been a problem.
it was always an issue, but it wasn't a major issue. And I think it coincides with the opening of the very far north reserves of Optimum, which is the furthest point from the beneficiation facility at Optimum. It was the
Yes,
furthest point. I think it coincides with that. I can't recall the exact details of when it started.
yes. Well, I know you will deal with the issue of penalties in due course, but when you do, I would be interested to know whether it had happened prior in previous years when there was this sizing problem that penalties were imposed. Okay, all right.
We can check that.
You can deal with that in due course. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ephron, we will, in due course, hopefully get the version of Eskom, but I'd like to make sure that I understand this part of your evidence. You say that there would have been informal discussions before the letter of April 2013.
Yes.
But formally, when you begin to address it contractually, in terms of the relevant provisions of the first addendum, this is the first time you invoke that clause.
That is correct.
Yes.
And if I can direct you to page 130 which is of the same letter, clause 4 at the top. We therefore hereby formally notify Eskom that we wish to renegotiate the specifications set out in clause 3.4.3 of the first addendum as contemplated in clause 3.4.4, 3.4.5 of the first addendum.
Yes.
So that sets the tone. And I think it's important, like I said, that they refrained from exercising their right in terms of the penalty on the understanding that that we were correct in our interpretation of the addendum.
Yes. Thank you for that. We know that the penalties come later, almost a year or so after this letter was sent to Eskom. But we'll get to that point. Now, insofar as the coal quality is concerned, you have identified the question of sizing. How did that issue affect the mine in relation to the question of pricing of that coal?
At this point in time,
Yes.
there were no penalties that were being incurred or set off as per the contract by Eskom. Eskom were taking all the material and they were using 100% of the material at that point in time.
Yes.
And to the best of my knowledge, there were no major effects on the power station at that point as a result of what was seen to believe to be excessive sizing, excessive undersize, let's say, of the coal that was being delivered.
And on the assumption that the coal load delivery was in terms of the CSA we have looked at, it may have changed via the addenda. We have not looked at them. But on that assumption, we can fairly assume from your evidence that you are still delivering the minimum and the maximum that we have looked at.
That is correct.
At this stage, when you wrote that letter of, I think, April 13 or April 2013, I don't know if the date was 13, but April 2013 to Eskom, was the issue only the sizing and not the quality or intrinsic value of the coal that you were delivering?
At this point, Deputy Chief Justice, it was only the sizing.
Okay, and also from Eskom's point of view, both of you were one, that was the issue, and
Yes.
nothing else.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, if yesterday there was evidence presented before you about how sizing affects the operation of the various components of the power stations,
Yeah.
I can ask the witness to
Yeah.
highlight how sizing becomes important in how.
Yeah, maybe he could do that. That's fine. That won't harm.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
You know how sizing affects the various components of the power stations?
Mr. Maleka, I'm not a technical expert, but from our knowledge,
Yes.
sizing affects the handleability of the coal. So if it rains and there's too much fines, there's too much very small sizing, the coal becomes very difficult to handle. And when you inject it into the power station, before you inject it, you need to crush the coal. And if it's very wet and there's a large amount of small size, the crushers don't work well, and therefore the injection of coal into the power station doesn't work well. That is my limited knowledge of the sizing issue.
Do you know that sizing may impact on the output capacity of the power station?
I'm not aware of that.
You're not aware of that? Okay. Let's leave it at that. You say in paragraph 16 that after you raise the question of sizing with Eskom, you then begin to pick up issues relating to the viability of Optimum Coal Mine, correct?
That's correct.
That's almost 2 months thereafter, because you peg the date as July 2013.
Yes, I specifically refer to by July 2013, which means it was these were happening in tandem.
It had started.
We had already identified that long before this point.
I understand, but by July you begin to mark the issue as a concern for you.
The reason why we raised July was because we'd started feeling the pinch of low export prices, and the exports could no longer subsidize the supply of coal to Eskom, and the mines were starting to lose significant money.
Let me just ask this question. You may or may not be able to deal with it. Probably you will be able to deal with it. The problem that the issues that were leading to you concluding that this was, or CSA was becoming commercially not viable. To what extent do you think that if the price regime that we talked about earlier had not been changed, maybe that might have protected you from this situation? Or is that something that...
Are you referring, Chief Justice, to the price regime being the cost plus?
Yes, I'm referring to that.
So if it was a cost plus situation, going back to that, there would have been no risk for the mine.
Yes.
Because Eskom would be responsible for paying the direct costs attributable.
Yes.
I think it's worth mentioning that the cost plus contract is not an anomaly.
Yes.
Rather look at it as a partnership.
Yes. No, I'm sure. I'm sure it is a partnership. I was just thinking that because my perception from what you have told us about that regime, price regime, my perception is that it was quite protective of the supplier of the mine. But I accept too that there were certain reasons that made it in the interest, or that may have made it in the interest of Eskom to enter into that kind of arrangement and pay the kinds of costs that one would normally expect the supplier to take care of. But I was just wondering whether with that protection which that regime provided to the supplier, whether you would have had this problem.
We wouldn't have had this problem. But
Okay.
there are, if I may,
Yes.
there are large advantages. There are a lot of advantages for Eskom under the cost plus arrangement.
Yes.
We see that today, that Eskom is paying a significant amount more for coal than what they would be had they stuck to the cost plus agreements.
Yes. But I'd got the impression when you talked to us about those two price regimes, I'd got the impression that the change may have been initiated by your side rather than by Eskom. But you didn't say so expressly, but I got that impression because you wanted to export coal as well.
Yes, it was before my time. I can't comment exactly. But if we look today, the cost plus mines are the best option for Eskom.
Yes, okay.
Because Eskom's not subject, when they buy coal today, they're subject to the market.
Yes. No, thank you.
You know, Mr. Ephron, these are some of the issues which were highlighted by an investigation initiated at the request of Eskom's board. And Chair, those are the issues that were highlighted in the Denton's report. And you seem to suggest that Eskom is suffering the financial ill effects of the shift in the pricing regime because cost plus mine and pricing is beneficial to Eskom.
That's correct. That's my opinion. That's my opinion.
Chair, you have at least evidence that confirms that.
Thank you.
But we'll take it further.
Yeah.
If I can move quite quickly, you explained to us in paragraph 17 how much Optimum Coal was losing under that CSA.
That's correct. That's only in 2013.
Yes.
So in 2013, on the basis of the sales to Eskom alone,
Yes.
we calculated that Optimum lost 829 million rand in that year alone.
Yes. You give us the mathematics in globular amounts, and we don't have the benefit of your calculation. I wonder whether you are able to do it to us confidentially if it's necessary.
I don't think it's confidential, Mr. Maleka. The calculation would simply have been the number of tons that were supplied in that particular year times 150 rand. Sorry, am I on the wrong track?
No, you're on the right track. If you can give it to us
Yes,
on
of
a
course.
month-to-month basis, that will be helpful.
We can do
I
that.
want to look at the granularity of that loss, because going forward, the issue becomes important.
I can see if we have that kind of detail.
The numbers are on your fingers as an accountant.
That number is on my fingers, but
My
month by month
mathematics-
may not be.
Yes. If I can get it on a monthly spreadsheet of some sort, that may well be helpful.
I'm sure that can be achieved.
Yes.
I would imagine that by any standard, that was a huge loss for Glencore, or not really.
No, that's a huge loss for anybody. And remember, Deputy Chief Justice, it wasn't only Glencore. There were significant other shareholders in the company.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes. And then in paragraph 18, you begin the discussion about the hardship clause that we have looked at. And you do so with reference to Annex CE3. Chair, that you will find from page 131. It's a standard arbitration agreement, unless there is anything arising from it. I would simply want you to confirm that as a result of your invocation of the hardship clause, the parties agreed to go to arbitration. Do you
That is
confirm
correct.
that? All right. And then you deal with what happens thereafter. I'm not going to lead you in that regard. I'd like you to explain to us in your own words what happened after the arbitration process was commenced.
So I'll refer to clause 19, that there was various discussions with Eskom at the time, but then we then go to clause 20, that by early 2014, which was a number of months after we invoked the hardship provision, Eskom approached us in the hope that we could establish a new agreement. And I think it's very important that we spend a little bit of time on this cooperation agreement, which was meant to be, we hoped, was a win-win scenario for a mine that was losing significant money. The idea of the cooperation agreement, and there's some clauses further on that talk explicitly about what it was meant to achieve.
It might be a small matter, but if once you say clause, I'm thinking of the contract CSA, so maybe it's just a paragraph on the statement.
Sorry, I will get that.
Yeah.
So you're saying clause 20 of my statement?
A paragraph for the statement and clause for the contract.
Paragraph for the statement, clause for the contract. I got it.
I'll take you to elements of the cooperation agreement
Okay.
that are important. By this time, you were already the CEO of Optimum Coal Mine, and I take it you were also the CEO or director of Optimum Coal Holdings, correct?
Correct.
Yes. And you say Eskom approached you. Do you recall who precisely on behalf of Eskom?
Johan Bester.
Johan Bester.
I'm sorry, can I take you a step back, going back to your invoking the arbitration clause? Can I take it that the arbitrator would have power to effectively try and make sure that the hardship which brought about the invocation of the arbitration clause, how it was remedied? He would have power to see how it was remedied, roughly speaking.
Yes,
Chair, I'll
there-
take you to the elements
to
of the
the-
cooperation agreement, which begin to answer
Yes, that
all of those
question.
concerns. Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. Okay.
But for now, you say that Mr. Johan Bester approached Glencore in order to explore the possibility of a settlement.
Yes.
Yes. And who, on behalf of Glencore, did he speak to about that possibility?
Myself.
Yourself. Okay. Chair, the name Johan Bester is becoming important, and you're going to hear his evidence in due course.
Yes.
Now, on that score, and in order to answer the concerns the chair has raised with you about the progression of the dispute or debate on hardship, can I ask you to turn to Annex CE4, which is to be found, Chair, from page 138. And there, Mr. Ephron, I'm going to deal not only with the actual text of this cooperation agreement, but the spirit of it, insofar as you're able to analyze it for us. The heading is self-evident, and the definition clauses in paragraphs 2.1 to 2.6 are self-evident. I'm not going to ask you to comment on them unless you want to do so.
I'm sorry, Mr. Van Leer, did you say 138?
138, Chair.
Okay.
You'll see it's emboldened CE4.
Yeah, okay, I've got it, yeah.
Paragraphs
Okay,
1
thank
and
you.
2 are not material for the purposes of dealing with the issues that you raised with Mr. Ephron, Chair.
Okay.
The first one that is important, Mr. Ephron, is paragraph 3. Can you deal with it? If necessary, you can read it.
I think it's best if the Commissioner allows that I read this.
Yes.
Because it encapsulates everything that's in the rest of the agreement.
Yes.
That's fine, do that.
I'm reading from clause 3 on CE4, page 138 at the bottom. The parties each believe that they have various accrued rights and claims arising out of the issues, including in respect of Optimum Mine and accrued right of cancellation in respect of the CSA. The parties, however, recognize that they have a mutual interest in ensuring that their commercial relationship is sustained for the duration of the CSA and potentially extended beyond the duration of the CSA. Accordingly, without waiving or compromising such rights and claims in any way and without acknowledging any liability or wrongdoing relating to any of the issues, the parties would like to engage in a negotiated process, settlement process, in order to attempt to reach a composite agreement which attempts to address each of the issues and results in the extension of the supply relationship between Eskom and Optimum Mine. If I may,
Yes.
what's critical to read into this was that this cooperation agreement had two important aspects. One, historical, and two, the future. Historical being settling of the hardship, the sizing, other penalties had arisen, and in addition, what is critical, what we thought was critical, was that there would be an extension of the CSA. The 25-year CSA would be extended by a further 5 years. At that point in time, coincided with the useful life of Hendrina Power Station from 2018 to 2023, and that they would continue to get supply from Optimum for that period. Significant tonnage, I think it was 4 or 5 million tons per annum. So there were two aspects in order to settle the historical disputes and also to find a way forward, to start the negotiation in a way that could extend this contract, which was very, very important for Hendrina Power Station and Eskom. That's what this cooperation agreement was meant to achieve.
Yes. You mentioned that some of the dispute related to possible penalties. My recollection is that no one sought to raise penalties. And penalties were not part and parcel of the arbitration which the parties were engaged in at that point in time, correct?
Correct. Penalties were not part of the arbitration.
Yes.
But the cooperation agreement was supposed to encapsulate all the difficulties that were being experienced on the mine, not only the hardship.
Yes.
Hardship was specifically around, arbitration was specifically around hardship.
You have identified the two major broad streams of the negotiations, the historical and the future. Okay. Now, can I ask you to go to clause 5 on page 139?
I'm sorry, Mr. Maleka, before you move to that point, I just want to have clarification on something.
Yes.
Both arising from one of your questions and from Mr. Ephron's answer. From what you say, I get the impression that although the penalties appeared to have been based on Eskom's complaint that what you were delivering was not in accordance with the agreement, but they were being kept out, that is the penalties, out of the issues that were subjected to the arbitration. Is my understanding correct?
That's correct. The arbitration only dealt with the hardship being endured by the mine.
Yes, and the hardship was separate from the issues that related to the penalties.
That's correct, because the hardship was all about the fact that Optimum was selling coal at a significant loss for each ton of coal delivered.
Okay, thank you.
And Chair, just to make sure that Mr. Ephron, there's foundation for your evidence, can you go to page 132, which is the arbitration reference agreement? And Chair, you know that in arbitration a dispute must be defined. The arbitrator has no right to resolve a dispute which is not defined.
Yes, yes.
Are you at page 132?
I am.
Can you scope the dispute as is defined in that agreement?
Oh, you're reading 1.2.
1.1.
1.1.
Yes.
A dispute, it is recorded that in 1.1, a dispute, the hardship dispute, has arisen between the claimants and the defendant in respect of claimant's claim that they have suffered hardship as contemplated in clause 27 of the Hendrina Coal Supply Agreement between the claimants and defendants, as amended from time to time.
1.2.
The claimants and the defendant have agreed to refer the hardship dispute to arbitration on the terms as set out in clause 27.4 and 30 of the Hendrina Coal Supply Agreement, read with this agreement.
Yeah, there was nothing further beyond this issue,
No.
which required arbitration.
No.
And there was nothing further which was an issue before the arbitrator when the parties decided that there should be some sort of negotiations via the cooperation agreement we're looking at.
No.
Where do you get the issue of the penalties from?
The penalties were an ongoing thing with Optimum. So there were two parts, if I may elaborate, there were two parts of the penalty. The one was the sizing, and I've described that in detail. The other one was an interpretation by Eskom of the calculation of the penalties regarding ash, which is a constituent of the coal, and calorific value, which is the heating value of the coal. And there was an ongoing interpretation dispute between Optimum and Hendrina and Eskom with respect to ash and calorific value penalty.
All right. I had directed your attention to clause 5 on page 139 as a clause that sets out a roadmap of the negotiations which the parties agreed to undertake when the arbitration was going on. And I'd like to highlight what I consider to be the essential features of the roadmap. 5.1 is important as far as I'm concerned.
May I read?
Yes.
5.1, the discussions will be conducted on a without prejudice basis, and each party fully reserves all of its rights in respect of accrued rights and claims as at the date of this agreement, on the basis that if the settlement process terminates at any time, then each party shall be fully entitled to exercise any of its accrued rights and bring any of its accrued claims. In other words, 5.2, the parties will instruct the attorneys to suspend the hardship arbitration on the following basis by no longer than 23 May 2014. So essentially we were putting aside, in terms of cooperation, we were putting aside hardship, penalty issues in order to find a way forward for the mine.
Yeah. You freeze the litigation.
We freeze the arbitration proceedings.
And you initiate the discussion, the negotiations.
Exactly.
Chair, someone told me that when clients don't trust the lawyers, they send them to litigation.
Yes.
So you have frozen the litigation, you begin the negotiations on the basis that...
Well, I can just say, Mr. Maleka, that my own experience, both in private practice and on the bench, is that it's not always unhelpful for the parties to deal with each other and forget about the lawyers for the time being. Sometimes it can produce good results.
Good results.
Yeah.
Yes. Those are the clients who have faith in their lawyers, Chair, and their negotiating skills.
But also, sometimes lawyers help a lot.
Yes.
Because sometimes there's too much acrimony between the parties and you need people to bring some sense
Yes, Chair.
into the discussions. Yeah.
Yes. Then you outline what will happen during the suspension period. And you do so from paragraph 5.2.1 going forward. Do you see that?
Yes.
Can I ask you to take us through what the parties contemplated would happen during the suspension period? And you are at liberty to read, if you can, from paragraph 5.2.2.
If I may, thank you. Notwithstanding 5.2.2, notwithstanding the suspension of the arbitration, the parties will arrange with the arbitrator and the parties' counsel to reserve dates required for a hearing in March 2015. This was some months ahead, on the basis that if the parties agree the terms of reference on or prior to the validation date, then such dates can be released. If the settlement process is terminated on or before the validation date, then Optimum Mine may, by notice in writing to Eskom, immediately reinstate the hardship arbitration, and the parties within 2 weeks agree to a revised timetable for the hardship arbitration with a March 2015 hearing date. I think it's worthwhile at this stage the reason why we did this was because arbitration is a very long process. The mine was losing a significant amount of money. And the idea was, entering into this cooperation agreement, we could go to our shareholders who were funding the mine to say, we need funding, we need to continue funding this mine, even though it's loss-making, because we have this cooperation agreement which allowed allowed the mine to continue while we were negotiating. But we didn't want to lose time on the hardship arbitration, and that's why we included 5.2.2 and 5.2.3.
Yes.
5.2.4, if the settlement process is terminated at any other time, then Optimum may by notice reinstate the hardship, I don't know if I read that or not, reinstate the hardship arbitration on the basis that the parties will as soon as possible thereafter meet in order to agree a new timetable and hearing date for the hardship arbitration.
Yeah, it seems to me when I hear you reading these clauses that there was some agency between the parties to resolve the issue either via the negotiations or through arbitration should the negotiations fail.
That's
because
correct.
It is for that reason that you kept the lawyers on their hunches and the arbitrator, you kept him available for
That's correct.
May 2015.
That is correct.
Yes.
And in addition, in 5.3, from Eskom's perspective, Eskom will, with retrospective effect to 1 May 2014 until the termination of the settlement process, suspend the implementation of all penalties, including AR, CV, ash sizing, and short supply in relation to the CSA, on the condition that Optimum Mine continues delivering coal in accordance with the specification to be agreed in the term of reference, and then the specifications are a little bit further ahead. So there was quid pro quo. There was from both sides.
This is the first time I see that penalties are introduced in terms, and that introduced by way of a suspension retrospectively to 1 May 2014. Can I ask you about that date? What was the magic about that date?
I can't recollect exactly what the importance of that date. The only thing I can say is that this was the month that we signed this agreement. So Eskom was saying any penalties that had been deducted prior to this would continue to apply, but going forward during the period of the cooperation agreement, all penalties were suspended because we had a difference of opinion on the methodology and interpretation of the penalties.
And then you agreed to set up the parties, or
5.4 deals with the parties and specifically names the people that were involved from.
and I'd like you to deal with the names from Eskom side.
The parties will establish negotiation teams who will be responsible for representing the parties in the settlement process. The Eskom team will comprise Kiran Maharaj, Johan Bester, Andrea Williams, Gert Opperman, Ayanda Nshanga. The Optimum team will comprise Clinton Ephron, Sean Tashner, Rian Deploy, and Dimitri Yatopoulos. The parties may supplement their teams from time to time.
Yes. Chair, as I indicated, Mr. Bester and also Mr. Opperman will testify in due course. All right. We now understand who the negotiating team members are. You can continue to tell us about the details of how the negotiations were to take place. I see in paragraph 5.5 there's reference to something called validation date. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
What does that supposed to mean?
We set up a validation date, and if I may read again, it's quite self-explanatory. The parties will, before the 13th of June 2014, the validation date, meet for 2 days in order to agree terms of reference which shall contain a detailed description of each of the issues to be negotiated, technical, commercial, and contractual. It being agreed that the terms of reference will include, as an issue for negotiation, the refund to optimum amount of penalties deducted by Eskom in respect of the period 1 September 2013 to 30 April 2014, as well as Eskom's historic claims in relation to qualities which include, amongst others, sizing. The parameters for the negotiation in respect of each of the issues, including in respect of price for the remainder of the term of the CSA, and any supply thereafter, the pricing philosophy that will be utilized to agree such prices, and the time period within which the negotiated process should be completed in respect of each of the issues. So it just set the framework.
Yes.
That what we needed to do before the validation date. It highlighted exactly what needs to be discussed by the validation date, and then we had time to go into each issue involving the parties, the power station, the mine. Everybody was involved in this process.
Can I highlight one issue that was going to become a subject matter of investigation, of negotiations, and ask you something about it at a factual level?
Yes.
You will see that one of the items identified for negotiations is a possible refund of penalties for a specific period, 1 September 2013 to 30 April 2014. Do you see that?
Yes.
It's more or less a 7 months period.
Yes.
And what I want to ask you is this. From your knowledge, did Eskom levy any penalties for that period?
Yes, they did.
Did Optimum Coal Mine pay those penalties?
The penalty mechanism is a set-off mechanism.
By way of set-off, or otherwise you pay for them?
You pay for them.
Yes.
So you immediately pay for the penalties when they are incurred.
Yes.
The reason why we include the refund of these penalties was because this was where we started with the difference in interpretation of the way in which the penalties were calculated at that point.
Yes.
But it was part and parcel of operating a big mine and operating a big power station. There would always be issues, and this was one of them.
Yes. All right, we have established factual matters.
Right.
And that will be a subject matter of a discussion for a possible refund, correct?
Correct.
Yes. Now let's proceed. And you talk about what might happen in the event certain things were not successfully negotiated after the validation date. You do so from paragraph 5.6.
Yes, in 5.6, if the parties are unable by the validation date to agree and execute the terms of reference, each of the parties shall be entitled to advise the other that it no longer wishes to participate in the settlement process. in which case the settlement process shall terminate.
And then 5.8,
And then 5.8, the parties agree that it is their current intention to conclude a new coal supply agreement which will govern the supply from Optimum Mine to Eskom from 1 January 2015.
yes. Remember, at that point in time, you are in May 2014,
Correct.
and you mark out the 1st of January 2015 as a date by which a new CSA ought to be concluded
Correct.
if the negotiations were successful.
Correct.
That tells me that you had set aside almost
6 months.
6 months to explore negotiations, during which you had suspended the dispute.
That's correct.
Did you believe that the period of 6 months was good enough to achieve an outcome one way or the other?
We
if
did.
the parties negotiated in good faith?
We did.
All right. I then ask you to look at paragraph 5.9, which uses a commercial terminology around the so-called term sheet.
It specifically says that if by 31 December 2014 a term sheet or new coal supply agreement has not been executed, then, unless the parties agree otherwise in writing, each of the parties shall be entitled to advise the other that it no longer wishes to participate in the settlement process, in which case the settlement process shall terminate.
Yes. And then there is another timeline in paragraph 5.10. I'll ask you to deal with it together with the express timeline set out in the table on page 141.
Yes, so 510 specifically makes mention that if a term sheet is executed by 31 December 2014, but the new coal supply agreement is not ready for signature, then the party shall execute the coal supply agreement as soon as possible thereafter, and making another drop-dead date of 31 March 2015.
I had asked you about the date by which the parties contemplated the execution of a new CSA, which is recorded in 5.8. But when I look at the table of the timelines on page 141, a totally different timeline is placed on the date. It is no longer 1 January, but it's 31 March 2015.
31 March 2015.
Yes.
I think what was envisaged at the time was that we would have a term sheet or a coal supply agreement done by the 31st of December 2014, but because these contracts are cumbersome, we felt that we would give ourselves a further 3 months in terms of actually signing a document, and that's why it says agree the new coal supply agreement by 31 March 2015. So for all intents and purposes, it was a 9-month period,
Yes.
not a 6-month period.
Thank you for that clarification. Is there any other aspect of significance that we should look at in regards to this cooperation agreement?
No, besides the fact that there was seriously a common desire by both parties to resolve the issues.
I mean, my understanding is that it is Eskom who approached you and not the other way around, although you had the desire to resolve the issue.
That's correct.
Do you know why Eskom took the initiative?
I think Eskom realized, and I read this earlier, I think Eskom realized at that point that they needed to secure their supply. They knew that they realized that there was a hardship problem. They wanted to justify to themselves that there would be a hardship, that there was in fact hardship being endured. And once they had justified it to themselves that there was genuine hardship, they thought it was a very good opportunity to secure the supply that was required for Hendrina Power Station till the end of its useful life. It made a lot of sense. Remember, the mine supplies coal over a conveyor belt over a fence into the power station.
Chair, I don't know whether you were given the graphic depiction of how this coal moves from one point to the other.
I think a certain amount was given.
Yes.
But if you think,
No, I don't want to repeat
yeah,
ground previously covered.
I think it was given.
Yes. Well, Mr. Ephron, I was going to take you to the next level of the development after this CSA, so after this cooperation agreement was executed. But on your statement, you interpose prior historical events which happened before the cooperation agreement was concluded, and you do so with events relating to 2012 from page 5, paragraph 22 of your statement. If they're important, you can run through them as quickly as you can.
I'll run through them very quickly. I'm referring now on page 5, paragraph 22, and what we're referring to here is that Optimum Coal Mine was a multi-product mine which supplied Eskom and exports, and while the cooperation agreement was being negotiated, because there was such a significant amount of money being lost by the mine, we felt it prudent to close the open cast, which was very capital heavy in terms of its requirements of funding. We decided to, at that stage, initiate a process to close the open cast section of the mine and only to continue supplying to Eskom in the hope that it would reduce costs overall of the mine. And that process, which is described in paragraph 22, paragraph 23, and 24, speaks specifically about that process. There's two things I'd like to quickly highlight, and that is by 2014, I'm now reading paragraph 23. By 2014, i.e. around the time the cooperation agreement came into effect, Optimum OCM was losing cash of approximately 80 to 100 million rand per month.
Yes. Again, I would ask you to give us the mathematics of the same kind we asked in regards to paragraph 17 of your statement. In other words, giving us a monthly spreadsheet, if you could.
No problem.
Are you happy with that?
Yes, I'm happy with that. The clause 25... paragraph 25 specifically refers to the closure of the open cast mine the open cast section of the mine enabled Optimum to reduce its losses, but it remained loss-making, and OCM was accordingly required to raise additional funding, to which Glencore, as the majority shareholder, contributed. And then on the next page, top of page 6, it's the same paragraph. In January and February of 2015 alone, this is this particular time, Glencore made approximately 480 million available to OCM by way of a shareholder funding.
Yes.
And at that point, we started the process of closing the open cast section, which effectively shut down the export option for Optimum, and it would become a mine producing only coal only for Eskom.
Mr. Ephron, can I interrupt you there? Elsewhere in your statement, you indicate that Optimum Coal had its own banking facility, on the strength of which it accessed loans from the banks to fund its own operation.
Yes.
Correct?
That's correct.
And I think at some point you indicate that the facility was in the order of 2.5 billion by the time the Oak Bay agreement was executed.
That's correct.
But here you reference a shareholder cash injection of 480 million. Was it a decision taken by Glencore as a shareholder to put that amount of cash resource to one of its own subsidiaries, even in the face of that facility?
The facility had been exhausted at that point, my recollection. So the 2.5 billion facility had been utilized with a consortium of 3 banks. There were no other facilities available to Optimum at the point that Glencore started to inject cash into the mine, Glencore and shareholders.
Yes. So without this cash injection, the financial condition of the mine was seriously imperiled.
Without the financial cash injection from Glencore, the mine would not have survived.
All right, you then resume the question of the negotiations in paragraph 26.
Yes, so we made some very good progress on the cooperation agreement after Eskom utilized the services of Nedbank and Basis Points Capital in order to do an audit to substantiate the costs regarding Optimum, and I read on 26, to satisfy Eskom that it was indeed in a precarious financial position and suffering hardship.
So from your perspective, there was full disclosure of the cost lines and cost items of the mine to Eskom, and those costs were interrogated by Eskom's advisors. You mentioned two of them, Nedbank and Basis Points Capital. I understand who's Nedbank, but I don't understand who is Basis Points Capital.
Basis Points Capital, from my recollection, was a small company that did financial analysis. I don't have much more detail than that. They were appointed by Eskom. Appointed and paid for by Eskom.
I understand, but do you know the figures, the persons who were involved?
I don't.
You don't?
No.
And then you express a belief in the last sentence of that paragraph concerning the success of the negotiations. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
What led you to that belief?
Well, we agreed on a fourth addendum. It was felt at the time that a new CSA at that point in time was too cumbersome to prepare, so we prepared a fourth addendum to the original 1993 CSA agreement. And that fourth addendum specifically spoke about the supply until 2023, which is what I've previously raised. And in addition, it gave Optimum an increase in its existing price from approximately 150 Rand a tonne to its cost of production. And it negotiated a price for the period 2019, 1 January 2019 to 31 December 2023, if my memory serves me correctly.
I'm going to take you to some features of this draft fourth addendum. And I put it no higher than that. It was a draft. Chair, you'll find it from page 144.
Yes.
And if you go to page 145, you'll see that it records historical amendments to the CSA during its lifespan via the first addendum. That is identified in 113 on page 145, correct? Are you there, Mr. Ephron?
Oh, yes, I'm with you.
Yes. And it tells us that the second addendum was executed on the 12th of April 2011. 115, correct?
Correct.
And then the third addendum comes into being on the 11th of February 2013, correct?
That's correct.
Right. We now have a history of where this fourth addendum in draft will fit in once it is executed by the parties. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And like all legal documents, they give you the introduction about the purpose of the agreement, correct?
Yes.
And I'd like you to deal, if you can, with paragraph 2.1.2, unless you conceive 211 to be important.
No, I think we've dealt with 211, most of the issues there. I think 212 is important, I agree. The parties have reached a settlement in relation to the issues subject to the settlement process, which settlement comprises an amendment to the CSA, including an extension and various reciprocal waivers and releases by the parties.
Yes. I'd like to explore a bit from your business perspective, and certainly from my legal perspective, the significance of that part of the parties' outcome of the negotiations relating to the reciprocal waiver.
think the reciprocal waiver refers to the penalties and hardship.
Yes.
I stand to be corrected.
In my understanding of this phrase, reciprocal waiver, it suggests that whatever rights and or obligations the parties may have asserted against each other, they now abandon them in the light of the new settlement agreement they have reached.
That's correct.
So for your part, if this fourth addendum was successfully concluded, you would have abandoned the hardship clause you invoked and its consequences.
That's correct.
And Eskom, for its part, and we will hear from them, they would have abandoned the question of penalties.
That's correct.
What I wanted to flag and tell me where I will find it is that you remember I highlighted for you one item of possible negotiations relating to the historical penalties in 2014 for that 6 months period. I can go back to it.
Yes.
In the cooperation agreement.
Yes.
You remember that?
Yes, I do.
And the possibility of negotiations on it was that there may well have been a repayment which Eskom would make to Optimum Coal Mine. I have read this fourth addendum, and unless I have misread it, I have not picked up that issue. Is it captured in the fourth addendum?
From my recollection, it would have been a negotiated process. So one of the negotiations, or one of the clauses, or one of the issues that we may have agreed to was to waive the penalties that were set off against the price for the period prior to July or prior to December of 2014, if my memory serves me correct. That's why you may not find it in the fourth addendum. Because it was the whole negotiation from the cooperation agreement which led to the fourth amendment was a negotiated process.
Understand. So are you saying that the issue may have been negotiated, but you decided to waive a refund on that score?
It would have been part of the negotiation. I can't recall exactly how that was.
Well, we were not there. That's why we're asking you these questions.
I can't recall, sorry, exactly how the refund of the penalties for that 6 month period was addressed. But if it's no longer in the fourth addendum, then it would have been waived as part of the negotiation. Remember, the fourth addendum was calling for Eskom to pay a significant more per ton with immediate effect. So there would have been quid pro quos on the entire negotiation in getting to this draft addendum.
All right. Can we proceed then on the premise that the draft fourth addendum does not specifically deal with that issue?
Yes.
Okay. Now, let's go to page 147. And see how the fourth addendum seeks to regulate the contractual relationship of the parties going forward. You did, in fairness, indicate that one of the issues you're going to explore was the possible amendment of the CSA to extend its lifespan, correct?
Correct.
And paragraph 3.1.1 deals with that question, correct?
Correct.
Can you just summarize it for us?
If I may read it.
Yes.
3.1.1 on page 147. The CSA talks about duration. The CSA shall, subject to clause 3.1.6, continue until a total quantity of 39,375,000 tons of coal, other than coal which is rejected in accordance with clause 3.1.4.4, total contract quantity has been supplied by OCM to Eskom after 1 April 2015 it being recorded for the sake of clarity that based on the current estimated annual tonnage of 4,500,000 tonnes, it is expected that the CSA will endure until approximately 31 December 2023.
Thank you. It seems to me, when I look at the clause, that the parties now begin to amend the quantities of the minimum and maximum as defined in the original CSA to 4.5 million estimate per month.
That's correct.
Yes. And the obligation to deliver begins from 1 April 2015, correct?
Correct.
That was 3 years before the expiry of the CSA.
Correct.
Then you extend the lifespan, correct?
Correct.
To 2023,
Correct.
which is another additional 15 years.
5 years.
5 years, I'm sorry. My mathematics is so bad. My teacher won't be proud of me. Sorry. 5 years. And then you begin to set out the contract price and its adjustment under the fourth addendum. Can I ask you to identify the amount that the parties contemplated would be the contract price for the supply of that quantity of coal?
Yes, so it's split up into two parts, 3.1.2.1.1. During the first period from 1 January 2015 to 31 December 2018, first period, the base price will be 18 Rand 85 per gigajoule, moisture-free, excluding VAT. And 3.1.2.1.2, during the period from 1 January 2019 to the base of termination of the CSA, the base price, second base price, will be 24.31 per gigajoule, excluding VAT.
Yes. So it's still a fixed price contract?
Yes.
Okay. And then you give the details on page 148. Unless you want to elaborate on them, I would like to skip them.
That's fine.
Then paragraph 3.1.4 on page 151.
The only relevance, if I may, Mr. Maleka,
Yes.
Deputy Chief Justice, is that on 148 there is a table which we believed accurately reflected the inflationary costs as an inflationary adjustment to the fixed price. And it's different to the mechanism in the original CSA. That's the important point of page 148.
Yes. And the cost component that would be components that would be affected by questions of inflation are identified on that page.
That's correct.
It's labor, diesel, electricity, materials. They're there. I mean, and you give us the percentage. I mean, I don't see anything of significant.
No, the significance of this is that this was an accurate assessment of the breakdown of the costs per ton and the amount in each cost that is broken up into labor, diesel, electricity, mechanical engineering materials, etc. And that the contract would then be escalated on an annual basis in accordance with the indexes, which is a far more representative inflationary adjustment than what was put into the 1993 agreement.
In other words, you're telling us that in the light of this scientific estimation, you're not likely to declare hardship in the 5 years?
No.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay. Understand that. Any matter before we ask you to deal with coal quality on page 151?
No.
And page 154, paragraph 3.1.5, it's a confirmation of the quantity that you have dealt with. Correct?
Sorry, can you just repeat that, please?
Page 154, clause 3.1.5.
Yes.
You have dealt with it.
Yes.
And you give the breakdown on page 155.
Yes.
Okay. Let me see whether there is any other thing. that I should raise with you in relation to this.
There's one last thing, if I may lead you,
Yes.
and that is the 3.1.4.1 on page 151.
151.
151.
Yes.
These specifications differ from the original CSA. And they are more realistic specifications. Remember, at this point in time, there was only 9 years to go. And it was with clear certainty that these specifications would be achieved from the mine on the information that we had at that point in time.
Okay. No, thanks for that input. Chair?
Yeah, no, I think, thank you.
Then we go to the waiver aspect, which is at page 161. Again, you've dealt with this, but if there is any aspect of it that you'd like to raise with us, please tell us.
No, I think that that deals with that. I think there's one thing that I wanted to make mention. Allow me to come back to it at some point.
There is then clause 4 on page 161, if you want to reflect on it.
No, I think we're done.
You're done?
Yeah.
All right. So it seems to me that you provided for this interim period of 5 years, but you made it quite clear that you will, in good faith, undertake further negotiations for the conclusion of a new CSA. That appears in clause 4 on page 161.
Yes. Sorry, I didn't know where you were. Yes, that is correct. So the idea was that this would be an addendum, but we would attempt to redraft the original CSA, which was written in 1993 and has a lot of complicated, tedious terms to it. So the intention was that the parties this would have been final and binding, but the idea was to redraft a CSA, which would have better encapsulated the
to update it, to modernize it to your new requirements.
That's correct.
Yeah, and that would have been the subject matter of negotiations.
That's correct. Yes. But the fourth addendum would have been sufficient had we not managed to redraft the CSA.
No, I understand. It's for a period of 5 years, you indicated.
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Ephron, that gives us a sense of what the parties agreed on during negotiations.
Sorry, Mr. Malek, it doesn't say 5 years. It says that the parties in clause 4, the parties shall, as soon as possible after the signature, negotiate in good faith to agree the terms of the written coal supply agreement.
I understand. But that means that the fourth addendum is binding.
That's correct.
And for as long as it's binding, the duration set out in clause 3 thereof would become binding.
That's correct.
Yes.
That's
and it's
correct.
a period of 5 years we talked about.
It's a total of 9 years, if I recall.
9 years, we could be correct.
Up until 2023, so it would have been from 1 April 2015 up until December 2023. I'm reading clause 3.1.
Yes.
Point 1.
Yes.
Okay.
So my understanding of this, and tell me whether I'm wrong, that the CSA as amended by the fourth addendum will continue to govern the contractual relationship between the parties.
That's correct.
But the parties contemplated to update it in due course.
That's correct.
Yes. We have exhausted what the parties had negotiated and agreed upon. There remained an issue of giving effect to that agreement in terms of the fourth addendum.
That's correct.
And there were certain governance processes that had to be completed to give some legal validity to it, correct?
That's correct.
Right. From the side of Optimum Coal Mine with its holding company, what did you do to give effect to the fourth addendum?
We didn't do anything. Oh, in terms of regulatory?
Did you sign it?
No.
What happened to it after it was drafted?
It couldn't be signed at that point in time. It needed to go through the Eskom procurement committees and various regulatory committees within Eskom.
So you waited for Eskom firstly to follow through its governance process
That's correct.
and hopefully sign it,
That's correct.
send it back to you, and you would review it and sign it.
That's correct. That was the idea.
Okay. Then you talk about that process from paragraph 27 of your statement on page 6. You have dealt with the terms of it in paragraph 27, and you talk about a development which happens from the 25th of March 2015. I am at paragraph 28, correct?
I'm with you. That's correct.
You confirm that on the 25th of March 2015, you were advised by someone in Eskom, we'll get to the details, that the Executive Procurement Committee of Eskom had approved that fourth addendum.
Correct.
Chair, we heard from Mr. Mabuza that the appropriate description of that committee was EXCOP and later called Executive Tender Committee.
I do recall that he mentioned that they used a certain name that appeared to be different from
this one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I can't remember which one he used.
And then I'd like to clear that up with you, Mr. Ephron. You talk in an indirect form of speech there. Who advised you?
Mr. Johan Bester advised me.
Okay. That the first governance leg of approval has gone through.
Yes.
How did he advise you?
It may have been telephonically. I don't recall.
Okay. And then you say that he advised you that that executive committee had approved it, subject to further approval by what you call the Eskom's Board Procurement Committee. Is that what he told you?
That's correct.
Yes. Chair, you recall again that Mr. Mabuza told us that it was a board tender committee, the BTC. Yes. And you say he told you that the meeting of the board tender committee would take place somewhere on the 15th of April 2015. Correct?
Correct.
It seems to me that there was some optimism from his side and from your side at that point in time.
Correct.
And you say something, and I'd like to explore with you because I don't get a sense of where you get all of this information from. You say, my understanding is that on 15 April 2015, the fourth addendum was presented to the Eskom, read for that, board tender committee, which in turn referred the matter to the main board for consideration. Correct?
Correct.
Where did you get that understanding from?
Well, that we knew it was, I think it was common knowledge or public knowledge that the Eskom board was sitting at that point, or Mr. Bester could have given me the information as to when the board was sitting or when the subcommittee of the board was sitting. But it was important because, remember, we had a critical point. We're still continuing to fund the mine. So each and every day was critical in terms of understanding the time frame to get to the point of finalization of this fourth addendum.
Yes. In the normal course of events, Mr. Ephron, you would have had some anxiety because, remember, you had set out the timeline for the execution of this agreement.
That's correct.
And as far as I remember, it was March. That's a 9 months period that you had set yourself out to achieve.
That is correct.
You have now exceeded the timeline.
That's correct.
Yes. There must have been a level of anxiety on your part.
There was.
Did you make any inquiries about what was happening from the side of Eskom?
No, besides what we'd been told, that it was going through the governance process of Eskom, there was nothing further.
Right. As a matter of fact, do you know whether the main Eskom board met and considered the fourth addendum?
I was told, yes.
By who?
It would have been Mr. Johan Bester again.
Okay. And then in paragraph 29, you talk about an event which has become common knowledge, and that is the reconstitution of the Eskom board, correct?
Correct.
You also talk about the change in the executive leadership of Eskom. You see that?
Yes.
Just take us through the changes that happened as far as you know them.
I think this is in the public domain that there were a number of executives that were suspended from Eskom. There were 4 main executives and some board members, and there was a new board constituted. I think the board was constituted before this, but Mr. Molefe was put in as CEO of Eskom, as acting CEO at that point.
And then you say that someone else also told you that the new acting CEO would contact you to discuss the issue of the fourth addendum further. Do you see that?
Yes, I do. That's correct.
Okay. Of course, you must have had some discussions with Mr. Molefe thereafter.
No. At that point, we had no discussions. Mr. Bester told us at the time that it had been taken to the board and that the board had said that the new acting chief executive officer, Mr. Brian Molefe, would be in contact with us to discuss the fourth addendum.
Yes. Chair, there are board minutes that we've looked at, and they indicate how the board itself decided to kick out this fourth addendum back to Mr. Molefe for further, I wouldn't say implementation.
For his consideration.
For his consideration, whatever that may mean.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, Mr. Bester told you what would happen to that fourth addendum insofar as Mr. Molefe is concerned. I'd like to get quite quickly to the question whether or not you had any discussion with Mr. Molefe after Mr. Bester told you those facts.
There was no contact by Mr. Molefe between the time of late April 2015, when it was taken to the board, and the 18th of May 2015, after numerous attempts, I managed to arrange a meeting with Mr. Molefe at Eskom's offices.
You took the initiative to arrange the meeting?
Yes.
All right. And did the meeting take place?
Yes, it did.
When?
Excuse me?
When?
On the 18th of May 2015.
Or is that the meeting you referred to at paragraph?
In paragraph 31 on page 7.
Yes. Can you quickly take us through the discussions you had with him on that day?
Yes, it was a very brief meeting, and at that meeting in Mr. Molefe's office, he said to me that Eskom would not be amending the terms of the CSA, and that it would continue to enforce its rights in terms of the contract, and that no amendments would be considered until the end of the contract at that point in time was December 2018. And that was the end of the discussion at that point.
Was it just the two of you only in the meeting?
Only the two of us in his office at Megawatt Park.
Okay, thank you.
How did you feel when he conveyed that position as Eskom's position?
Devastated.
Prior to this meeting, as I understand your statement and your evidence, it appears that there was quite a high degree of optimism on the part of yourselves that this would be approved.
There was optimism, Chief Justice, there was optimism from both sides, from
Yes.
Eskom's side and our side, that it would be
Yes.
approved.
Yes, okay.
Before we go for the lunch adjournment, can I ask you to consider this question and, if necessary, deal with it? The history of this fourth addendum reflects a serious negotiations,
A series of?
a serious negotiation between representatives of the parties, some of whom were technical individuals.
That's correct.
And those technical individuals negotiated an agreement that they were willing and prepared to support, and they did.
That's correct.
The executive leadership of Eskom, before Mr. Molefe came in, supported that agreement.
Of primary energy, that's correct.
Yes. And that's why they took it to the BTC and the full board for consideration and, if necessary, approval.
That is correct.
Did you ask Mr. Molefe why such a sudden change of attitude in the light of the series of the negotiations that you have dealt with?
I did.
And what did he tell you?
He said Eskom can't change the contract.
All right.
And do you know whether or not his predecessor was supportive of this agreement, or is that something you didn't know?
I wasn't aware of it, but it appeared through discussions with Mr. Bester, maybe he would be best to explain that
Yes.
it was supported.
Yes, but the management level that you are sure about was supportive was the PED management.
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
yes.
Chair, I see that is 1 o'clock.
Okay, we'll take the lunch adjournment and we will resume at 2 o'clock. We adjourn.
All right.
supply.
So they Tegeta took over.
Tegeta gave me very good. So, well among
Okay, let's end it. Yeah, no company high.
Hold on.
How they lost the contract.
Oh, because one of us finally contract you on is a saving.
What's going on here? Okay. Okay, I'm ready. Okay.
White.
Are you okay?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3.
Okay, yeah, kamu hanya more there.
Hello? Oh, yeah.